Hey, my name is Ben and I teach you how to write Unity shaders from scratch. In this video, we are going to go over new ways that Unity is doing post effects in Unity 2022. Recently, their biggest change was changing from render texture handle, I believe that was the previous one, to RTHandle. They have a different way of doing things. Fortunately, there's not too much documentation on this, so I'm not even entirely sure if I've implemented it correctly. However, it does seem to work, so I'm just going ahead with it. At the same time, of showing you those changes for Unity 2022, I'm also going to show you how to implement some of these simple effects: multiply, color burn, linear burn. And if these sound familiar, they're just really the similar layering effects that Photoshop does. What I did is I captured some of just kind of looked at some of the math that they do, or maybe these are just kind of guesses of how they are done. And I just move them into the shader. So as you can see here now, our tint effect can do color dodge, linear burn, which looks really wrong here, but I think it is correct. Color burn, this is looking at color dodge, and let's just say we set it to a little lower. We go back to Photoshop, you can start to see that it is pretty similar. The intensity doesn't quite line up to the opacity here, but you can see that the effect looks similar. So let's jump right into the video. All right, so the setup for this project is pretty simple. We have two scripts here I've already pre-created. I'll go over them real quick. Tint effect component and tint effect feature. Tint effect component has just an intensity currently, and whenever the intensity is greater than 0, it'll turn it on to active. What this component does is under your global volume, right, in the inspector, you can now add custom tint effect. The name reflects right here, as you can see, custom tint effect. Let's go ahead and turn that on. If we turn it on, nothing particularly happens yet because it hasn't been set up properly. Let's go over tint effect feature. Tint effect feature has two parts to it. Feature is a scriptable render feature, and you also need a scriptable render pass. This is the minimum requirement for any custom post effect. One feature, one pass. In your feature, we need to define the pass, and I've called it, as you can see here, tint effect pass. I just called it pass. And in our override, where we add render passes, we need to enqueue the pass. So now that we know that this pass is actually being enqueued here. In fact, to enable it, all we have to do is go to our settings, whichever URP renderer you are using. You want to make sure you add tint effect render feature, tint effect feature. So if I have this removed, I simply go add feature, tint effect feature, click that and make sure your tint effect feature has been added. Once that has been added, and that name and this name should be the same. As of this moment, the post effect is actually active. However, as you can see here, nothing has been set up, nothing is executing. We're going to go ahead and go through that right now. Last thing we need is this tint effect. And what this tint effect is a very basic post effects shader. As you can see here, the vertex is being set up. If you don't know exactly what's happening here, I do have previous videos that I've kind of gone over each of these. As you can see here, we're just using Unity's way of doing post effects, setting up the post effects for this vertex output. All this is doing is taking whatever main texture that we pass into it, which is the previous screen, doing modifications to it and returning it. So the first thing we want to do is let's go to our tint effect component and let's add in this color. Let's call it tint color. And we will default it to white. Once we save that off, we go to the global volume. We go to the global volume, you can see that tint color has now been added. These can be enabled on and off, right? So one of the first things we want to set up is when this post effect is happening. To do that, under our tint effects pass, we take the render pass event. This is a variable within scriptable render pass, and we simply equal to when do we want it. Let's just do it before the post effects happens. Yeah, it's before post processing. This is really before Unity's post processing, right at the start of post processing, because we can only set before or after. All right, so the next part will be a little bit complicated in order before we can see something happening on screen. So the basic post effects has a source, which is the frame buffer, what is happening on screen. We have a temporary render texture, which is where we want to send the source, make the modifications, and then we have to blit it back to what we call destination. So we need 3 render targets, right? So in Unity, they used to call it render texture, then they called it render texture handler. Now in Unity 2022, which has been a little bit confusing, they call it RTHandle. So let's go ahead and create 3 RTHandles. One source, which is the frame buffer, one temporary, which is what we're going to blit to, and one destination, which is the final frame buffer after our post effects. So RTHandle source. The first thing we want to get is the source, and we can grab the source from the camera. So let's go ahead and grab it from on camera setup. At the same time, since tint material is here, we also want to set up the material. We can also set that up on camera setup. So as you can see here, our shader name is custom tint effect. Let's go ahead and grab that and set up the material. So we grab our tint shader and then we take tint material is equal to new material, and we throw in our tint shader. Very simple so far. So our material has been set up. Next, let's go ahead and grab our source. So it's going to be rendering data dot camera data dot renderer dot camera color target handle, I believe. And while we're here, and since we have the source, which is the frame buffer, that means we also have the size of the frame buffer. And what we want to do is we want to create a render texture, a temporary render texture with the same size. So let's initialize our temp RTHandle here. So let's go ahead and do temp is equal to RTHandle.allocate. Actually, RTHandles.allocate. And what we want to do is allocate the size here. So, and the height, which is Y. Now, unfortunately, Unity doesn't have a lot of documentation when it comes to RTHandles. What I've done is just kind of look through how they've initialized it, and I've just kind of done my own way, and it seems to have worked. However, if you guys see something that, hey, this is not quite right, I'm doing something wrong, please do let me know, because there's just limited documentation on how we're supposed to use RTHandle. Next, what we want to make sure is on the camera cleanup, we actually handle the cleanup of this. So we want to make sure we release the memory format. The blit of the post effect happens here. There's 2 things that we need to do. First, we need to do is capture the command buffer. The command buffer is, we used to do things like graphics.blit, but now we have to grab the command buffer, and the command buffer is really the graphics, and then that is where we do the blit from. So to grab the current command buffer, it's something like this. All we do is go to the command buffer pool and get the first one. Currently there's only one, so you can just do .get and it should grab the current command buffer. Next, we don't know if the current command buffer has been doing post effects already. It shouldn't be because it's set to before, but just in case it did, we should always clear it. Next, what we need to do is grab our post effects information from the command, from the global volume. We need to pick up this intensity and this tint color. To do that, it's quite simple. What we need to do is go to our volume manager.instance and get the whole stack. And then once we're in that stack, what we want to do is pull out the tint effect component. Tint effect is now equal to the stack, which is this object. And what we're doing is we're pulling out the tint effect component. And here, now we should have access to the intensity, right? As you can see here, or the color that we have set up before. Right, so now that we have our tint effect, the first thing we want to do is check if it is actually active. So simply, if tint effect is active, go ahead and do the post effect, right? And that's what we're going to do inside this if statement. We're going to do the post effects, which is managing the blitting of the effect. All right, so all post effects generally has 2 blits. One, we need to blit the temporary render texture, the one that we have created temporary memory for, which is this line right here, allocate the memory for it. to the destination, and then from the destination back to the source. So the destination needs some sort of reference. So we can just make it reference to the source first. Okay. That way, even if there was no blit, the destination wouldn't be broken. You should see no changes here. It's almost having no blit happening at all. So before we actually do that, we have to set up the material and the shader. So if we go back to our component, we have two things. We have an intensity and a tint color. Let's go ahead and go to our shader and create an intensity and a tint color. So here, we'll just go ahead and do float intensity, which is a single value intensity. So intensity and color have been created here in the shader. Next, we want to modify the material with those values. So to do that is simply set color, set float. We'll do the float first. Instead of intensity, we need shader.property ID, and then we can set the intensity value here. Right, it's float parameter, so we need to grab the value of it. So we'll do the same thing for color. Awesome, so now that the material has been set up, we can go ahead and do our blit. So the blit is command.blit. It used to be graphics.blit, and what we would want to do is blit the temporary texture onto the destination first. So temp onto destination. The pass in which we need to, I believe the next one is pass. No, it's material first. So the material, which is tint material, and then the pass, which is pass 0. Pass 0, as I shared before, is this one right here. It's the first pass in the shader. Last thing we want to do is blit the destination back onto the source. If we do this, we're actually not complete yet. What we need to do is initialize the command. To do that, it's quite simple. It is context.execute command buffer. This is simply the way to execute the blit happening. We didn't have to do this before, but this is the new way of doing it. And finally, we also need to make sure we clean up the command buffer. So we go to our pool and we make sure we release it. So we grabbed it, we did our blit, and then we released it. We execute and then we released it. So let's save that off. Let's go back here and we should start to see something. Currently, I believe nothing is happening is because the shader itself, all it does is takes the color and spits it back out. Let's go ahead and multiply it with the color and with the intensity. Save that off. And as you can see, yes, it is actually working. We can control the intensity and we can also control the tint color. Awesome. Tinting a post effect is pretty kind of boring actually, but when it comes to creating your own variation, you can actually just kind of do everything that other programs happen to do. So I'm just going to pull up some math from Photoshop actually. As you can see here, they have multiply, color burn, linear burn, screen, dodge, etc. Right? So as you can see, A is the active layer, which is the screen itself, and B, the background layer, meaning let's just say we want to do a tint of red on it, would be the background layer. So let's go ahead and do all of this here. Let's do multiply, color burn, linear burn, screen, dodge, etc. Right? And I'm not coming up with this math. As you can see here, you can also go to do other things like overlay and soft light, hard light. You can go ahead and make those modifications yourself, but I'm going to go ahead and do these 6 quickly, showing you how we can pull that off. So the first thing I want to do is put in an enum, tint mode, we have the multiply and all those things that I was just talking about. Next, this is actually how Unity did it, how they did their own dropdown. I believe they referenced the volume parameter, passed in the enum, and they could actually set it up like so. So with that set up, we can have now a tint parameter and we can set the default to multiply. Save that off. Earlier I had a small mistake. I forgot to put serializable here. We gotta make sure that this class is serializable. So now we can have the drop down here. To use the drop down, very simple. Let's go ahead and go to our execute. We can just do like maybe a switch. So this is the switch function we put in. Very simple. We just take the value of the mode which is this, right? And if it's multiply, we set the keyword to multiply. Color burn, we set to color burn, linear burn, and so on and so forth. So with the keywords set, what we can do is go in here and do shader feature, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and so on. Exactly the same wording as you have here. And shader feature, and if you list it out like this, means only one can be enabled at any given time. So let's go ahead and do the first one, which is already a multiply. So in fact, what we're going to do is we are going to take color and we're going to make it equal to this, and then we're going to return color at the end. Okay, and what we can do is have this one be the first multiply. So all right, so simply from here on out, all you just got to do is kind of take the math that you like. So multiply is this, color burn is that. All right, so one of the things I did to help myself make it easier is I just kind of copy the math over. B is the background layer, so it's the underlying layers, meaning the screen active layer is what we're doing on top. So A will be the color, B will be the, here, you know what? Background, a little bit easier to understand. And background is equal to 1 minus B, which is 1 minus background, divided by A, divided by color, and we'll do color times intensity. Let's go ahead and save that and see if the color burn works. I think it does. Let's set it to 1. This has been saturated. I wonder if the background needs to be saturated too. Just give me 1 second. In fact, I will just copy this and put it here. Yes, it does. Okay, so that looks correct. Let's verify this in Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, I have a color overlay. We're going to do color burn. It kept some of the red, whereas this one didn't. I suppose it will not be exactly the same all the time, but let's go ahead and do other ones and see if we can get similar effect, because this is pretty close except for that reddish here. And maybe the way we're multiplying intensity here isn't quite right. Let's go ahead and do linear burn, which is just adding them together, -1. The -1 is happening on the background, so I have this backwards. And then -1. Let's go ahead and check linear burn. There's no intensity currently. Well, let's kind of compare it to Photoshop's. You know what? I wonder if I did the math wrong. The linear burn looks more like the color burn that we had before. Just yank out the math again. Let me just pull out the math again. Color burn is, no, linear burn is A plus B -1. All right, let's just keep going. Screen, let's go ahead and do that. Background, it's equal to 1 minus A, so 1 minus intensity, color intensity, multiplied by 1 minus B, so 1 minus the background. That looks quite close. Let's do screen. Whoops. Hey, now we're getting somewhere. This looks a lot closer to what we want. because this does seem correct. As you can see here, we did a 55% intensity. If we go back to Photoshop, 32, 55, it just seems like the opacity here and this intensity don't line up, but the effect that is happening is identical. So I do think that the math here is correct. So yeah, that is it actually from me. I just wanted to show you how to move some of the effects that are from Photoshop over to Unity. Some, especially the intensity, seems to be a little bit off, so there is some modifications that you need to make. But yeah, this is a way where you guys can do custom post effects with some of the math that you pull from online. So that's it from me. If you guys like what you see, please like, subscribe, and support my channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye now.